In the light of this prophecy, John's Gospel specifically remarks that his followers were surprised that he was not born in Bethlehem.
Others said, "This is the Christ." But some said, "Shall Christ come out of Galilee? Hath not the Scripture said that Christ cometh of the seed of David, and out of the town of Bethlehem, where David was?"
Matthew and Luke handle the problem differently, by deciding that Jesus must have been born in Bethlehem after all. But they get him there by different routes. Matthew has Mary and Joseph in Bethlehem all along, moving to Nazareth only long after the birth of Jesus, on their return from Egypt, where they fled from King Herod and the massacre of the innocents. Luke, by contrast, acknowledges that Mary and Joseph lived in Nazareth before Jesus was born. So, how to get them to Bethlehem at the crucial moment, in order to fulfill the prophecy? Luke says that in the time when Quirinius, was governor of Syria, Caesar Augustus decreed a census for taxation purposes, and everybody had to go to his own city. Joseph was of the house and lineage of David, and therefore he had to go to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem. That must have seemed like a good solution, except that historically it is complete nonsense, as A.N. Wilson in Jesus and Robin Lane Fox in The Unauthorized Version, among others, have pointed out. David, if he existed, lived nearly 1,000 years before Mary and Joseph. Why on earth would the Romans have required Joseph to go to the city where a remote ancestor had lived a millennium earlier? It is as though I were required to specify, say, Ashby de la Zouche as my hometown on a census form, if it happened that I could trace my ancestry back to the Seigneur de Dacaine, who came over with William the Conqueror and settled there.
Moreover, Luke screws up his dating by tactlessly mentioning events that historians are capable of independently checking. There was indeed a census under Governor Quirinius, a local census, not one decreed by Caesar Augustus for the empire as a whole, but it happened too late, in AD 6, long after Herod's death. Lane Fox concludes that Luke's story is historically impossible and internally incoherent, but he sympathizes with Luke's plight and his desire to fulfill the prophecy of Micah. In the December 2004 issue of Free Inquiry, Tom Flynn, the editor of that excellent magazine, assembled a collection of articles documenting the contradictions and gaping holes in the well-loved Christmas story. Flynn himself lists the many contradictions between Matthew and Luke, the only two evangelists who treat the birth of Jesus at all. Robert Gillooly shows how all the essential features of the Jesus legend, including the star in the east, the virgin birth, the veneration of the baby by kings, the miracles, the execution, the resurrection, and the ascension, are borrowed, every last one of them, from other religions already in existence in the Mediterranean and Near East region. Flynn suggests that Matthew's desire to fulfill messianic prophecies, descent from David, birth in Bethlehem, for the benefit of Jewish readers, came into headlong collision with Luke's desire to adapt Christianity for the Gentiles, and hence to press the familiar hot buttons of pagan Hellenistic religions, virgin birth, worship by kings, etc. The resulting contradictions are glaring, but consistently overlooked by the faithful. Sophisticated Christians do not need George Gershwin to convince them that the things that you're liable to read in the Bible, it ain't necessarily so. But there are many unsophisticated Christians out there who think it absolutely is necessarily so, who take the Bible very seriously indeed as a literal and accurate record of history and hence as evidence supporting their religious beliefs. Do these people never open the book that they believe is the literal truth? Why don't they notice those glaring contradictions? Shouldn't a literalist worry about the fact that Matthew traces Joseph's descent from King David via 28 intermediate generations, while Luke has 41 generations? Worse, there is almost no overlap in the names on the two lists. In any case, if Jesus really was born of a virgin, Joseph's ancestry is irrelevant and cannot be used to fulfill, on Jesus' behalf, the Old Testament prophecy that the Messiah should be descended from David.
The American biblical scholar Bart Ehrman, in a book whose subtitle is The Story Behind Who Changed the New Testament and Why, unfolds the huge uncertainty befogging the New Testament texts. In the introduction to the book, Professor Ehrman movingly charts his personal educational journey from Bible-believing fundamentalist to thoughtful skeptic, a journey driven by his dawning realization of the massive fallibility of the Scriptures. Significantly, as he moved up the hierarchy of American universities from rock bottom at the Moody Bible Institute, through Wheaton College, a little bit higher on the scale but still the alma mater of Billy Graham, to Princeton in the world-beating class at the top, he was at every stage warned that he would have trouble maintaining his fundamentalist Christianity in the face of dangerous progressivism. So it proved, and we, his readers, are the beneficiaries. Other refreshingly iconoclastic books of biblical criticism are Robin Lane Fox's The Unauthorized Version already mentioned, and Jack Berliner-Blau's The Secular Bible, Why Non-Believers Must Take Religion Seriously. The 4 Gospels that made it into the official canon were chosen, more or less arbitrarily, out of a larger sample of at least a dozen, including the Gospels of Thomas, Peter, Nicodemus, Philip, Bartholomew, and Mary Magdalene. It is these additional Gospels that Thomas Jefferson was referring to in his letter to his nephew.
I forgot to observe, when speaking of the New Testament, that you should read all the histories of Christ, as well of those whom a council of ecclesiastics have decided for us to be pseudo-evangelists, as those they named evangelists, because these pseudo-evangelists pretended to inspiration, as much as the others, and you are to judge their pretensions by your own reason, and not by the reason of those ecclesiastics.
The Gospels that didn't make it were omitted by those ecclesiastics, perhaps because they included stories that were even more embarrassingly implausible than those in the 4 canonical ones. The Gospel of Thomas, for example, has numerous anecdotes about the child Jesus abusing his magical powers in the manner of a mischievous fairy, impishly transforming his playmates into goats, or turning mud into sparrows, or giving his father a hand with the carpentry by miraculously lengthening a piece of wood.
A.N. Wilson, in his biography of Jesus, casts doubt on the story that Joseph was a carpenter at all. The Greek word tekton does indeed mean carpenter, but it was translated from the Aramaic word nagar, which could mean craftsman or learned man. This is one of several constructive mistranslations that bedevil the Bible, the most famous being the mistranslation of Isaiah's Hebrew for young woman, alma, into the Greek for virgin, parthenos. An easy mistake to make. Think of the English words maid and maiden to see how it might have happened. This one translator's slip was to be wildly inflated and give rise to the whole preposterous legend of Jesus' mother being a virgin. The only competitor for the title of champion constructive mistranslation of all time also concerns virgins. Ibn Warraq has hilariously argued that in the famous promise of 72 virgins to every Muslim martyr, virgins is a mistranslation of white raisins of crystal clarity. Now, if only that had been more widely known, how many innocent victims of suicide missions might have been saved.
It will be said that nobody believes crude miracle stories such as those in the Gospel of Thomas anyway. But there is no more and no less reason to believe the 4 canonical Gospels. All have the status of legends, as factually dubious as the stories of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table.
Most of what the 4 canonical Gospels share is derived from a common source, either Mark's Gospel or a lost work of which Mark is the earliest extant descendant. Nobody knows who the 4 evangelists were, but they almost certainly never met Jesus personally. Much of what they wrote was in no sense an honest attempt at history, but was simply rehashed from the Old Testament, because the Gospel makers were devoutly convinced that the life of Jesus must fulfill Old Testament prophecies. It is even possible to mount a serious, though not widely supported, historical case that Jesus never lived at all, as has been done by, among others, Professor G.A. Wells of the University of London in a number of books including Did Jesus Exist?